So I'm not sure how much of my audience this video will upset, since, I got started. When I first started getting noticed on YouTube, I was making videos about anarchism and being an anarchist, that kind of thing. And the biggest jumps in subscribers and viewership that I've gotten was from anarchist people, sharing and shilling my shit. Um, So, yeah, I would imagine that a significant amount of my audience are anarchists. Um, but I definitely don't want to upset anyone. I don't really intend this to be, you know, anything dismissive or, trying to pwn anybody, because I don't think that is helpful at all, especially with this specific conversation. Um, and yeah, I would also imagine, considering that a lot of my viewers are, kind of more from the lefty pole sphere. I doubt that they would be the type to, you know, the type of anarchists who would freak out because, some tanky is being a tanky, like that kind of thing, which you do see a lot of more rad lib types do. I would imagine that my audience would not do that. Um, but anyway, yeah, I just wanted to talk about my history with anarchism, my problems with anarchism now, and I guess how we can, I don't know, my ideas for how I would try to advance this discourse in the future, maybe. I don't know. Um, but yeah, like I said, I used to be an anarchist. That was my introduction into radical politics, was through anarchism. And it was it was not done in what you would call the best way. It was pretty much, my radicalization happened through Facebook memes and YouTube videos. I had essentially zero theoretical basis for my anarchist beliefs, um, and really anarchism for me, and I think for a lot of other people as well. I've seen other former anarchists say this kind of thing. Um, but anarchism was really just a way to engage with anti capitalist radical politics without having to get your hands dirty with, the Soviet Union or the PRC or the DPRK, which are places that, you know, 99% of people, who are speaking English anyway, have grown up hearing are evil, authoritarian hellholes where everybody's in jail and starving. Um, and so, anarchism is a good way to avoid having to deal with that while still maintaining, the obvious critiques that you see in capitalism. Um, but I became an anarchist in late 2016, and I officially stopped in winter 2017. I actually made a video about it back then. Um, so for about a year is how long I was able to hold on to my anarchism despite having no theoretical understanding of it. And really, the thing that caused me to stop becoming one, or stop being one rather, was my increasing exposure to more Marxist points of view, more Marxist discussion, learning about more of the history of the USSR and China and all those other countries. Um, and so, eventually it just came to a point where I realized that, these countries are not the boogeymen that I had believed them to be, and thus, working off of their models of socialism would not necessarily be, a terrible, evil, monstrous thing. Um, and so, yeah, that brings us to pretty much now, where I've just been, learning more Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist theory, history, that kind of stuff. um, yeah. So the first thing um, about anarchists and Marxists is that at least like actual honest Marxists who have any kind of theoretical understanding, there are definitely a lot of people that you'll find online. Like the kinds of people that just have like Stalin profile pics, who are just like, no, dude, the USSR did nothing wrong. Like those kinds of people who are more shitposty meme communists. They definitely would probably not say this, but I would hope that any serious anarchists would kind of disregard those people just as or disregard those people as like the dumb people on the Marxist side, just as I disregard a lot of the more rad lib anarchists that I see as on the dumb side of anarchists. um, but yeah, I don't think that um, Marxists and anarchists disagree a lot on theory, especially regarding the state. um, you know I agree. Like it is objectively true that the state is an institution which which is to a certain extent authoritarian. It does limit democracy. It is bureaucratic. Um, all those complaints are valid, but I think the difference is that anarchists also assume that the state cannot serve a function other than um, promoting the interests of the the wealthy. Um, and while that is true, uh, it is true that states serve the interests of the ruling class. I mean, the idea of a socialist society is that the working class becomes the ruling class, and thus the state serves their interests. And obviously, that's a pretty simplistic way of putting it. It is not anywhere near that simple in reality, obviously. And there are definitely critiques that could be made of, socialist governments who have not necessarily lived up to that idea. But I do not think that that is necessarily. I don't think that that's a ridiculous thing to think at all, and especially considering the huge gains made by the working class in Russia and in North Korea and in Cuba. I think that that still holds up to historical scrutiny. Um, and I also don't think that anarchism, doesn't work in again in that kind of simplistic sense. Um, Obviously, as a communist, I believe in the uh, fucking what's the viability of anarchism as a social, as a social organization. Um, My issue with it, though, is that I think that the conditions required to have a prolonged, prosperous anarchist society um, are not really going to come about on their own or through solely anarchist agitation. Because historically, anarchism in its revolutions has had a very difficult time dealing with capitalist encirclement or um, just any kind of capital subversion. And I mean, obviously, though, that's not anything inconsiderable. The monumental forces of capital being put against any socialist society. Um, but anarchists revolutions have seemed to not handle it, um, or have imploded under the weight of them, I guess. And I feel like this brings up another conversation. I feel when you're talking about failed anarchist revolutions, that kind of brings up more of like a partisan um, like excuse generating thing, like, oh, well, the conditions weren't really fair. um, the anarchists also had to deal with the Republicans, and Stalin didn't send them enough supplies, and Franco was being supplied by the Nazis, and all that kind of stuff. Um, I don't know necessarily how true all of it is, but even assuming it's all true, at the end of the day, it's ultimately the anarchists' fault that the revolution didn't succeed. Um, the entire way that you measure the success of a revolution is how much good they are able to do considering their conditions. And while I obviously won't claim that the conditions of the Catalonian anarchists weren't, I won't claim that they were good or anything, um, there have definitely been just as bad, if not worse, scenarios faced by Marxist Leninist revolutions. If you know anything about the Russian Civil War or about the dire state of the CCP before the Japanese invasion of China, um, Marxist Leninist revolutions do seem to be capable of dealing with even the most dire of conditions given the right leadership and the right circumstances. Um, and that's another thing with anarchists is that, Marxists will point out that, the short length of time that anarchist revolutions have lasted, and they'll say, oh, well, the USSR still fell to capitalism, and the PRC is now revisionist and that kind of stuff. Um, and although the last one is, it's a debate that can be had, um, it is still nonetheless true that despite the fact that these countries have, ostensibly fell or whatever, the monumental good that they did is still, undeniable. The huge and quick, uh, the vast and uh fuck, I'm trying to think of like a fancy word for fucking fast. The vast and fast industrialization of Russia brought hundreds of millions of people out of, peasant conditions. Um, Literacy programs, education programs, cultural programs, all that kind of stuff in the Soviet Union. Similar things in China, similar things in the DPRK and Cuba. Um, Even if all of these countries eventually fell to capitalism or whatever, um, that good can never be erased or taken away. What permanent effects did the anarchists of Catalonia have on the region? Maybe aside from historical nostalgia, not that much that I'm aware of. Um, yeah, so that's pretty much the short version of it. Um, there could be more like nuanced places where nuance could be inserted, or maybe some other issues that I could talk about. But that's the short version of my issue with anarchism. That it seems to be, historically speaking, um, a method of organization that is not, uh, that is not super well suited to dealing with the antagonistic forces, internal and external forces of capital. Um, and that's a shame. Obvious. If it was, if I thought that it was historically viable for, to have an anarchist revolution, then I would absolutely support it because, like I said, I think that it would undeniably be better to live in, a prosperous, free anarchist society than to live in, a Marxist-Leninist one. Um, but the issue is that I don't think that that is necessarily a historically viable thing. So yeah, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking about this one. Have some discussion, that kind of stuff. Peace out.